Good morning, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and welcome to the first bookish breakfast since Jane Austen July, so it has been a while. Basically, I worked a lot of night shifts in August. I think I worked more than 10 night shifts, and I also had two quite significant deadlines for a course that I've been working on for over a year. So I was focused quite a lot of my days off on either sleeping and catching up on some sleep or working towards those deadlines. But what that means is that I was doing a lot of comfort reading and a lot of middle of the night shift, can't do anything else reading. So I finished 19 books in August, which I'm pretty pleased with. I have to say, I don't think I've read that many books in a month in a very long time, possibly ever. And one of the weird things about my reading in the month is that the majority of it was by only two authors, because I read two quite significant series, and one of those series I'm going to review for you today, and that is the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. I've got 3 of the books from the series physically with me here, and I've also got To Be Taught as Fortunate, which is a novella which is not from the same series. You could imagine it as being from the same world. My husband, when he read this, thought it was part of the series. But yeah, it's a separate standalone novella. So, the Wayfarer series is a sci-fi series, and it's quite a modern series. I think The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which is the first book in the series, came out in 2014, or it was copyrighted in 2014. So yeah, it's very new for me. I don't tend to read a huge number of very, very new books, and it's also sci-fi, and I really don't tend to read sci-fi. What I would say about the Wayfarer series is it doesn't really read like sci-fi. Like, it definitely is. It's all like spaceships and alien species and things like that. But it's very human and open and caring and really just lovely. And although sometimes it deals with, I guess, more challenging things, the overall effect of this series is very heartwarming, and it never left me a little bit like scientifically bamboozled, or I never really felt like she was trying too hard to create this imagined world that she's created. And that world itself is absolutely fantastic. I will hope to mention more about that as I go through the series. So I read this on my husband's recommendation, and he listened to them all as audiobooks, and he said to me, I think it was about halfway through the first book, he was like, we were just driving along, he was giving me a lift somewhere, and he was like, what does it mean about a book when you're not reading it, but you just can't stop thinking about it? I was like, that means it's a good book. Like, you'd want like a lot of the books that you read to have that effect, but he was like, I just can't stop thinking about this book. Even when I'm not reading it, I just can't stop thinking about it. So I was like, well, I've definitely got to give it a go at least. So I did. So I didn't... We had them, my husband had them all as audiobooks, and he liked them so much that he bought them as paper copies, the first ones that are out in paperback. There's one missing that is only in hardback, and I read them in a kind of like a blended way, which actually worked really well for me. So I kind of alternated. I listened to the audiobook when I was like doing the washing up or doing general household chores, and then when I could sit down or when I was like at work on night shifts and stuff, then I switched to the physical paper copy. I've never really done that before, and I didn't expect it to work, but actually it flowed really nicely for the majority of these books. I should have noted down who the audiobook narrator was, but I failed to do that. So this has got a kind of like an interesting backstory to it, I suppose. I think Becky Chambers, she was working in something like theatre. I'm just wondering whether it says about the author at the back, but I can't find it. No, I can't find it. I think she was working in some kind of theatre-related job, but her parents are both serious, spacey, scientisty people, like astrophysics type things. So she's got an upbringing based on how amazing the galaxy is, how amazing the universe is outside of the Earth. So I guess she's grown up with that kind of scientific backstory, I suppose. And then at a certain point, she's decided to pause her theatre job and write a book. And she managed to crowdfund for some money to have the funding to complete the book. And then after the book came out, it did so well in like the online community that it was funded as a like it was picked up by an actual publishing house. So this is a real, like, I guess, online self-publishing dream. Like, she's that kind of very lucky chance where it actually all worked out for her. which I think it's a really lovely story, and like the idea of just going for it and managing to make it work out. The Wayfarer series has achieved a certain amount of critical acclaim. I definitely heard of it a good few times before my husband started reading it. And it's won the Hugo Award for Best Series, which I would definitely agree with. It was the best series that I read last month, probably the best series that I've read this year. I would be very surprised if at the end of the year a book from the Wayfarer series doesn't wind up in my top 10 or even my top 5 books. It would mean that I've read some very, very good books in the latter half of the year, which would be lovely. So yeah, to start talking about the books themselves, trying to not go on for too long, the first book in the series is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And this book is set on a spaceship, and it's a multi-species spaceship. So there are some human characters from a couple of different human backgrounds. So in this world you have Exodans and Solans are ones that are humans that came from a privileged background and evacuated Earth to live on Mars before Earth collapsed. And Exodans are the humans who were left behind, who built themselves massive spaceships to escape on, and then they kind of grew up on these massive spaceship communities. So there's a couple of different humans. Then there are several different types of alien, I suppose. And in the world of the story, I think alien is a bit of a slur, I suppose. And there's also other slurs, for instance. So there's a species called the Andrisk, which is one of the most fantastically realised of Becky Chambers' alternative species. And these have like a reptilian appearance. So then there is a character that calls one of these like a lizard, and a lizard is, I guess, like a racist term within the context of the galaxy in which this is set. So I guess that kind of leads on to how Becky Chambers kind of handles her themes, and she does do a lot of stuff about acceptance and diversity and how to have an inclusive and tolerant society or an inclusive and tolerant group in a situation where everyone is so different, like so very different, because all of these species act and interact in different ways and have different social norms, and they each have to adapt in little ways to make space for the other people that they are sharing this spaceship with. So yeah, it's set on this spaceship. They have this specific kind of work, and they are set a work assignment that involves them going for a very, very long trip, a very, very long way away, and it's very character-based and how those characters interact in the spaceship over a substantial amount of time. I would say, I guess one of the flaws of The Long Way to the Small Angry Planet is that every character has their thing, and there's quite a few characters. So because we go into a lot of different point of views, I feel like to get a better character-based story, she would spend more time with less characters, or just cut down the number of characters as it stood. Like every single thing was very interesting, but I would have liked more time exploring each of those interesting things rather than having more of those things in the book. I don't know whether that was because this was obviously her first novel. She probably didn't know how well things were going to go with her writing. She possibly felt like she had to fit all of her ideas into the one book, and might not have realised that she would have the time to explore it more if she held on a bit, I suppose. Just going back to that idea of tolerance and inclusiveness, the main antagonist of the book kind of comes out of nowhere, I guess, towards the end, which is another, I guess, slight flaw in it. But essentially she leads towards this conclusion that the only thing that an inclusive, tolerant, intergalactic community can't tolerate is intolerance. So they come up against various different groups who do not want to be part of the intergalactic community, is the way I'm going to I think they call it the Galactic Commons, who want to be kind of insular and don't want to necessarily mix in the same way that others within the community want to mix. But some of those, it's like they mind their own business and you just don't go into their space, or if you do, you kind of expect to have some problems there. But some of them, or one specific group, is a society that's based on consensus, and in order to do anything, the whole society has to agree, which sounds like a really good concept on the basis of it. Like, everyone has to agree, how good. Except the way that they manage disagreement is with violence. And essentially, if anyone disagrees, they have to kind of fight it out. And I think it's quite, I don't necessarily agree with her arguments, I suppose. I don't necessarily agree that we should I don't know, it's kind of, it goes, I guess it kind of leans in towards the cancel culture type thing, and the kind of conclusion of, well, we can't have anything to do with them because they can be violent. It doesn't necessarily look at building bridges, but I suppose the idea is that where people are so attached to their ideals that they can't contemplate a difference in opinion, and that differences in opinion will lead to provoke violence that will affect, you know, a whole range of beings, then that's not something that you can just absorb as a society. So I think she does a very good job of using this sci-fi world to make you think about things that are relevant to your own world, I suppose. So anyway, so that's book one. From then on, the series becomes a little bit unconventional. It's not like a book one is the start of the big major events, and then book two is the next step of the big major events. It's kind of like, it's a bit of a fork, and The Long Way to the Small Angry Planet is the handle of the fork, and then the other books in this series are the prongs of the fork. So they all kind of start where Small Angry Planet ends and kind of fork in different directions, all working with quite minor characters from the original book. But yeah, all exploring different themes in interesting ways. So the second book that I read, I think you could read the next three in any order, I suppose, because like I said, they all fork off from the same point. The second book is A Closed and Common Orbit, and this is the best book of the series, definitely. If you know that you're only going to read one of them, I would say read this one. But that said, it does have some minor spoilers for the first book, so, you know, you could say it's better to just read them all. I would say read them all, but, you know, if you're definitely not going to read them all, then read this one. So this one is about it does basically improves on the criticism that I had of Small Angry Planet when I said there are too many characters and too many things going on. It really cuts it back so that there's only two main characters, two kind of point of view characters, and they are Sidra, who is a sentient artificial intelligence, and Pepper, who is a clone. And it kind of looks at these two characters that were created for a purpose, that were created to serve people who thought they had power over the intellects of others, I suppose, and they have been created. Pepper was created to sort waste and sort rubbish, and that was supposed to be the entirety of her life, was to sort through waste. And Sidra was created to look after a ship and basically run the ship, but not have any independent life outside of this ship. And it looks at what happens to both of them when they escape that role that they were developed for, and how they fit into a normal life and like learn to do other things and to broaden their horizons. This has got, it's just got a really nice balance of a survival story where Pepper, who at the time was called Jane because all of the clones from her age range were called Jane. So when Jane escapes from the clone factory, it's got like how she survives and how she is raised and brought up into being a human being that can fit into a different society. And she is raised by another sentient AI who is tied into a ship. And then moving forward in time, she becomes Pepper and she meets Sidra, and it's about how Pepper assists Sidra with working out what her life's going to be like now that she, as a sentient AI, has been removed from the ship that she was supposed to be working in for various reasons. It's just really, really lovely. I really like it. And it looks a little bit about how people's prejudices can be challenged. Sidra is pretending not to be an AI most of the time. She has to, it's illegal for her to exist in a normal space as a sentient AI. It's not allowed in this world. So it looks at how she forges relationships and friends, and like that act of pretending and I guess in a way passing, and what happens when people find out about her and how they kind of adjust their thinking, I suppose, when they get along with her. So I found that really interesting. It was really heartwarming. It was really lovely. One thing I should say about this series is, I'm trying to find one, like the inclusion of little things like this, which is like, I guess, It's called the Linkings, which I guess is like the Galactic Commons internet, and they can withdraw little bits of information. And I like the way that it's presented on the page. It just makes it an interesting read, I suppose. Then the next book in the series is Record of a Spaceborn Few, and this looks back at those Exodus ships that I mentioned, the big ships where the majority of humans live, and the thing I found most challenging to believe in Record of a Spaceborn Few was that human beings would ever get along as well as they do in this book. So they live in these big communal ships. Space is partitioned out completely evenly. Nobody has to work. Everyone will be fed even if they don't work. So work is purely a status-based thing, but everyone has to take turns in the most unpleasant work. I just can't see humanity ever working out in such an egalitarian way. And it looks at what happens on one of these Exodus ships when two outsiders arrive. So one of those outsiders is a Harmadian, which is an alternative species that I guess they're a bit like slugs. I don't know, or mollusks, I'm not entirely sure. But like big slimy creatures. They're much better described by Becky Chambers, with like tentacle thingies. Mollusks, I suppose. And one outsider, a human who is not from the Exodus community, but feels like going to the Exodus community is a way for him to start a new life and be welcomed into what he sees as this kind of big human family, as like a kind of a lost young man thing. And it goes through a lot of different points of view, and it kind of tells the story of a series of events unfolding so we get like a younger woman, an older woman, a young man. I guess my issue with this one was that I kind of felt like the female characters were quite similar. I sometimes struggled to remember which one I was reading. It was like the same woman at different stages of her life rather than being distinct people. So that was managed a little bit less well, I think, the multiple point of view things. In general, I think the multiple point of views, particularly going back to the first book when she was telling from the point of view of a couple of different species as well, they all think so much like humans that it sometimes undermines slightly the way that she was trying to present them as being very, very different. And then when you read from their point of view, they just think in the same way. Like, not as in their voices were the same, but as in the way that they process their thoughts still seems very human. And I suppose she gets away with that by just like kind of saying that all sentient beings have certain similarities and certain like moral similarities as well, I suppose. So yeah, Record of a Spaceborn Few is a bit more, I was going to say it's a bit more like a murder mystery, but it's not really, because there's no murder and there's no mystery, but it just kind of had a bit more of that feel to it. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed it, but I wouldn't say it's the best in the series. Then the final book in that series is The Galaxy and the Ground Within. I hope I've got that title right, because like I said, I don't have the physical copy of it because it's still only in hardback. We'll be getting it when we can find it secondhand from somewhere. And yeah, that one is about what happens when a group of people get stranded on a very small planet that's just like I guess it's like if you got stuck at a motorway service station. If for some reason the motorway had to close and you were stuck at a motorway service station with like 4 other people, all of whom are very, very different to you. And there's the host of the motorway service station who just wants everyone to be happy and comfortable. And there's her kid. And they are, I've forgotten what the name of that species is. But they're like a specific type of alien. Such a great review. I know the names of everything. And then there's an Akarak, which is kind of more of like a bird-like alien thing. And they are particularly distinctive because they come from a planet where they didn't have to breathe oxygen. And this is so unusual to the point that when other sentient beings are learning what are the like fundamental criteria for life, they learn that one of the fundamental criteria is that you have to breathe oxygen. So from the start, the Akaraks are just basically not counted as life, even though they are sentient beings. So they can't interact with the world in the same way that all other aliens can, because they have to always be in their space suits with their, I think it's methane, with their methane gas, because otherwise they will just die. So it's a lot of the book looks at how the Akarax have continuously faced a lot of systemic discrimination. Their homes have been destroyed, and the Galactic Commons has consistently failed to create a new home for them. And because of that, it's driven a lot of the Akarax into criminality and piracy. So they've become very much a hated and feared species. One of the other characters that's stuck at this service station is a kind of involved in galactic law enforcement and supporting some of the wars that are ongoing to protect galactic territories. So partway through the book, there is a bit of a swerve into a big political discussion between the character who's been kind of on the receiving end of wars and the character who is supporting wars, not because she's like warmongering, but because she thinks that it's her duty to protect the civilians that are involved. And they have a bit of a clash of opinions, and it's kind of clear that neither of them are entirely right or entirely wrong, and there's no real way to come up with a clear-cut, nice solution to this issue. I would say that although it was interesting to have that kind of real world issue projected into this world, to me it was a bit of an odd veer in the pattern of the book, which is otherwise more focused on their kind of day-to-day interactions of being stuck in this tiny spot for a few days, and like the difficulties that come up when their things are delayed, and just generally what happens. I enjoyed it. There is a moment of tension where something happens. One of the characters gets into difficulty, and then the other characters have to kind of like work together to support them. And I thought it was nice the way it showed them working together as a team, even though they didn't get along very well in some cases. So I enjoyed that. But overall, yeah, it's just not quite as tight as A Closed and Common Order, if that makes sense. But still a very, very good book, and I definitely enjoyed it. So this has already been longer than I perhaps intended, but I just wanted to mention To Be Taught If Fortunate, which, like I mentioned, it is a novella, and it is from 2019, paperback edition published 2020. And this is basically a selection of stories about, well, it flows over time. It just, there's sections to it, so it kind of separates out a little bit, about told from the point of view of a human who has been involved. I'm just finding it really difficult to like find the way to describe it, but basically there's a spaceship full of humans, and they've been sent to assess a number of planets that are thought to be likely targets for life, being hospitable to life. And it's set in the near future. I think it's set in the 22nd century, and at a time when space travel has become space exploration has become like a crowdfunded thing, and there's this program where every interested citizen can pay in and then see astronauts go to assess these likely targets for life. But choosing to go, it's such a long distance that they are leaving their entire families behind, and they know that they will come back after their families have died, because technology allows them to be put into stasis for periods of their voyage so that they can survive the whole thing, but their families will be aging. I mentioned that in the Wayfarer series, all of the sentient species kind of think alike. That's very much different, I suppose, in To Be Taught If Fortunate, because they do meet alien life forms, but they're more like animals in that we don't know whether or not they're sentient. We don't know what level of communication they have, if any. The impression that they get from some of these creatures is that they are intelligent, but they have no way of communicating to find that out. It's interesting. It looks at kind of how dark and difficult it can get being part of a very, very small crew, a very, very long way away from home. It reads a lot more like sci-fi. I found it less enjoyable because of that. I'm not really a massive sci-fi person, but I did feel like I learned about astronomy from this book. I did feel like I know more about tidally locked planets or the criteria that might be needed for life. One thing that I would say is that in the final planet that they go to, they make a discovery, and they are all so excited about this discovery, but it's never mentioned up to that point in the book. And I think this would be a much stronger book if they mention from the start that this is one of the things that they are setting out to try and discover. And if they fed it into the book and they come to the one planet and they find the one thing, but it doesn't quite meet this discovery criteria, and then they come to the next planet and they find something else, but it again doesn't quite meet this it isn't this great discovery, and then when they finally do get that great discovery, as a reader we would get a lot more payoff. So I think that one tiny change would make this maybe a much better book. The ending of this I wasn't really sure about. I can kind of see why they did it, but their characters are basically faced with a choice about whether to go back to Earth or whether to stay out and continue exploring, and they kind of decide to do neither, and whereas to me I feel like the choice would be fairly clear cut, and like deciding to do neither would not be an option that I would think of as valid. I think I don't know, I just kind of disagreed, but I guess that's kind of the point, like to get you thinking, like what would you do in that situation, and how would that work, and what is the psychological impact of some of the things that they see in being away from Earth for so long. So yeah, I would recommend this if you are more into more of a sci-fi type book, but it is still very much about characters and relationships between characters and things. Yeah, these were really enjoyable books. I really enjoyed the way that they made me think about real world things in the context of a fantastic invented galaxy. I would just love for some of these species to be real. I'd love to be able to meet an Andrisk or to meet a Harmadian. That would be incredible. Which I guess is a sign of a good book, is that it builds that kind of faith in these characters. Anyway, I've gone on for way too long already, but in summary, this is a really good series and I recommend that you give it a go. It is, I should say, it's a young adult, I suppose, but like an older young adult, I would say. It's not necessarily written for it's kind of fits into that kind of young adulty criteria, and quite easy to read, but at the same time really thought-provoking and not falling into the young adulty tropiness. I mean, I've not read that many sci-fi books, so I don't know that many sci-fi tropes, but it didn't read as simplistically as a lot of YA, I would say. Anyway, take care everyone, and hopefully there will be another bookish breakfast it won't take a whole month for the next one, hopefully. Okay, take care.